The cabin lights flickered as passengers settled into their seats. Laughter and chatter filled the narrow aisles, but in the corner of row 14, a woman sat trembling, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Sarah Mitchell. 28, 6 months pregnant, and hiding bruises that told a story no one else on this plane could imagine. She pressed her palm against her swollen belly, as if to shield her unborn child from the world outside. Her other hand clutched a small bag, smeared faintly with blood where her skin had split from the beating just hours before. Her face was pale. The left side of her cheek bore a dark purple bruise that even makeup couldn't hide. A thin trail of blood trickled from her lip, quickly wiped away before the flight attendant could notice. She bowed her head, letting her hair curtain her face. If anyone looked closely, they would see her shoulders shaking. Tears slipped down silently, one after another, landing on her blouse. Passengers around her whispered, but none dared to ask. To them, she was just another tired traveler. To Sarah, this plane wasn't simply transportation, it was escape. Every minute that the engines roared louder, she felt both hope and terror collide inside her chest. Hope, because she was finally leaving the prison of her violent marriage. Terror, because she knew her husband's reach could stretch farther than she ever wanted to believe. She tried to breathe steadily, but the taste of iron still lingered in her mouth. Just this morning, Mark's fists had rained down on her, his voice filled with rage and betrayal. She had curled on the kitchen floor, protecting her belly while pain exploded across her body. He had left her there, broken, and laughed as he slammed the door on his way to meet his mistress. That laugh still echoed in her ears. Now, as she sat among strangers thousands of feet above the ground, Sarah felt like a ghost, half alive, half dead. Her tears blurred the window beside her, streaking the reflection of her battered face. She raised her hand slightly to adjust the curtain, and for the first time, the bruises on her wrist were revealed in the bright cabin light. A gasp came from 2 seats away. Someone had seen. Sarah froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned, her eyes swollen and red, only to meet the gaze of a man she never thought she would see again. It was James Carter, her old friend from college. His eyes widened in shock, not at the years that had passed, but at the blood and bruises marking the woman he once knew as strong, joyful, full of life. Sarah wanted to disappear into the seat, but it was too late. James had seen everything, and in that instant, the fate of this flight and her life shifted forever. What would James do now that the truth was written all over her body? The hum of the airplane faded into the background as Sarah sank deeper into her seat. James's shocked eyes lingered in her mind, but her thoughts drifted back to the nightmare she had been living. No one here knew the weight she carried, not just the child growing inside her, but the memories etched into her bruised skin. Her marriage had not always been a battlefield. At first, Mark Mitchell had been charming, even tender. He courted her with flowers, promises, and whispered dreams of a perfect future. Sarah had believed him. She had been young, full of hope, and desperate to build a family of her own. For a while, life seemed sweet. The small apartment they shared was filled with laughter and plans for children. She thought she had found safety. But the sweetness did not last. Slowly, almost too quietly to notice at first, Mark's love turned sharp. It began with cruel words, sarcasm disguised as jokes, criticism about her cooking, her clothes, her friends. Sarah brushed it off, telling herself all marriages had rough edges. Then came the yelling, louder each time, shaking the walls of their home. And finally, the blows. His hands that once held her now left her trembling, broken, ashamed. Pregnancy was supposed to change everything. That was what Sarah told herself when she saw the test strip turn blue. She had imagined Mark's anger would soften when he knew a child was on the way. She prayed that fatherhood would awaken tenderness in him. But instead, the violence grew worse. Every argument became an explosion. Every day she lived in fear of what might trigger him. The way she folded laundry, the dinner arriving late, or even the sound of her own voice. Sarah had learned to hide her scars beneath long sleeves and practice smiles. At work, she was the dependable secretary, polite and steady. At home, she was a prisoner, measuring every word, every step, to avoid his wrath. Yet no matter how careful she was, the storm always came. What hurt most wasn't the bruises. It was the loneliness. She had cut herself off from friends to cover the shame, telling lies to explain her absences and excuses for the marks on her skin. Even her parents believed she was living a happy life with her husband. Sarah carried the truth alone, in silence, while the baby inside her felt every shake of her trembling body. As the plane sped through the night sky, she pressed her hand over her belly again. Her child deserved more than this cycle of fear. She deserved more. That was why she had run. She had left behind the home, the memories, even her wedding ring, slipping it into the trash can before rushing to the airport. Tears welled again, but this time they carried something more than pain. They carried the faintest spark of courage. Sarah knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, she had chosen to fight for herself. And soon, she would discover she wasn't fighting alone. The steady drone of the engines filled the cabin, but Sarah's heart was still racing. She tried to steady her breathing, clutching the thin blanket the flight attendant had given her. Across the aisle, James continued to watch her quietly, his eyes full of concern, but Sarah avoided his gaze. She wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. Then, a voice, familiar, sharp, and cruel, cut through the quiet like a knife. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" Sarah's entire body froze. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she turned toward the aisle. Standing there with a smirk painted across her face was Olivia Parker, the woman who had stolen what little remained of Sarah's dignity. Mark's mistress. Olivia's beauty was undeniable: polished hair, flawless makeup, designer dress that hugged her figure. But behind the charm was venom. She looked at Sarah the way a predator studies its prey, enjoying the weakness she saw. "I didn't think you'd have the courage to show your face outside that miserable apartment," Olivia sneered. Her words dripped with mockery, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Guess Mark finally scared you out." Sarah's cheeks burned, though not from shame this time, from fury. She had endured her husband's fists, but the woman standing before her represented the cruelest betrayal of all. Olivia had not only taken Mark, she had fueled his cruelty, whispering poison into his ear until Sarah was nothing more than a shadow in her own home. James shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening as he studied the exchange. He recognized Olivia instantly. She had been on magazine covers, often photographed at charity events, always pretending to be respectable. But here, her mask slipped. "Leave me alone," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. She pulled the blanket tighter, trying to shield her bruises, but Olivia's eyes caught the faint mark along Sarah's wrist. Instead of pity, a cruel laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, darling, look at you, playing the victim again. Do you really think anyone's going to believe your sob story?" Olivia leaned closer, her perfume nauseatingly sweet. "Mark told me everything. He said you're unstable. He said you hit yourself just to frame him." The words landed like daggers. Sarah clenched her fists, her breath unsteady. She wanted to scream the truth, to rip the lies apart, but her voice felt trapped. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to listen yet unable to ignore the tension. James finally stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over Olivia. "That's enough," he said firmly. His voice carried authority, the kind that silenced even the hum of the plane. Olivia blinked, startled for a moment, but then smirked again. "And who are you?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. James didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered to Sarah, then back to Olivia. His silence was deliberate, heavy with unspoken power. Olivia's smirk faltered, just slightly. For the first time, Sarah felt something shift inside her, not fear, but the possibility of justice. And Olivia had no idea just how dangerous this flight was about to become. After Olivia stormed down the aisle, tossing one last mocking smile over her shoulder, Sarah sank into her seat, trembling. The encounter had left her shaken, her chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. She tried to focus on the hum of the engines, to disappear into the fabric of her seat, but she couldn't escape the weight of James's presence beside her. He hadn't stopped watching her, not with judgment, but with a deep concern that unsettled her. Finally, he leaned closer, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Sarah, is it really you?" Her eyes flickered up, hesitant. For the first time in years, she saw kindness staring back at her. James Carter, her old college friend, the man who once helped her study for exams late at night, who made her laugh until her sides ached. Back then, he had been ambitious, full of plans to build something bigger than himself. Now, here he was. Older, stronger, carrying himself with the calm confidence of someone who had seen the world and conquered it. "Yes," she whispered, her throat tight. "It's me." James's brow furrowed as his gaze swept over her bruised cheek, her trembling hands. "What happened to you?" The question pierced her. For years, she had hidden behind lies, excuses, half-smiles. No one had dared to ask directly. No one had cared enough. And now, here was James, a familiar face from her happiest days, demanding an answer she wasn't ready to give. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to look away. "I can't talk about it," she muttered. James leaned back slightly, respecting her silence, but his eyes told her he wouldn't let it go. Not this time. Not when he had seen the truth written across her battered skin. A flight attendant passed by, checking seatbelts. Sarah forced a weak smile, pretending to be fine, but James noticed how her fingers dug into the armrest. When the attendant moved on, he spoke again, softer now. "You don't have to tell me everything. Just know you're not alone anymore." The words nearly broke her. For so long, Sarah had lived in isolation, her world controlled by Mark's violence and Olivia's cruelty. To hear someone say she wasn't alone felt almost impossible, like a dream she couldn't trust. Why are you here?" she asked, her voice trembling. James gave a faint smile. "Because this is my plane." Sarah blinked, stunned. She thought she had misheard him, but his calm nod confirmed it. James wasn't just another passenger. He was the owner of the airline itself. Power and influence radiated from him, yet his eyes held no arrogance, only sincerity. For the first time since boarding, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't sitting beside just an old friend. She was sitting beside a man who could change everything. And soon, Mark would learn that Sarah was no longer defenseless. The plane had not yet lifted from the runway, but Sarah felt as if the walls were already closing in. The confrontation with Olivia still burned in her chest, and James's sudden reappearance had stirred emotions she thought she had buried forever. The cabin air seemed heavy, pressing down on her lungs. She tried to focus on the rhythm of her breathing, but every inhale carried the scent of fear. Her hand rested protectively over her belly, fingers trembling. The baby shifted inside her, as if sensing her distress. Sarah whispered under her breath, "It's okay, little one. Mommy's here." But the words rang hollow, a desperate attempt to soothe a storm that raged far beyond her control. Across the aisle, Olivia whispered to another passenger, her laughter sharp and deliberate. Every chuckle was a dagger aimed directly at Sarah's heart. She could feel eyes on her, curious, suspicious, pitying. Passengers were beginning to notice the tension, and Sarah hated being the center of their silent judgment. James leaned closer. "Don't listen to her," he said firmly. His voice was low, but it carried an undeniable strength. "She wants to break you. Don't let her win." Sarah shook her head, her voice cracking. "You don't understand. Mark will find me. He always does. If he learns I'm here, if he sees me with you." She stopped, unable to finish. The memory of his fists, his rage, the cruel smile when Olivia was by his side, all of it threatened to drown her again. James's jaw tightened. "Then let him come. He won't touch you again, not while I'm here." The certainty in his tone should have comforted her, but instead it frightened her. Mark was ruthless. He didn't care who stood in his way. What if James became a target too? Sarah's heart pounded faster, torn between the desperate desire to believe in his protection and the fear of dragging him into her nightmare. The intercom crackled, announcing a short delay before takeoff. The words, "delay and unexpected issue," echoed through the cabin, and Sarah's blood ran cold. What if Mark was already here? What if he had discovered her escape and was moving to stop her? Her breathing quickened, shallow and panicked. She clutched the seat in front of her, nails digging into the fabric. Passengers glanced back, some with annoyance, others with quiet concern. James placed his hand gently over hers. His touch was steady, grounding. "Look at me," he urged. Sarah forced her eyes upward, meeting his gaze. In those steady blue eyes, she saw something she hadn't felt in years: safety. Her tears blurred her vision, but she didn't look away. "You're stronger than you think," James said softly. "And you're not running anymore. This time, you'll fight." Sarah swallowed hard, her chest still tight, but for the first time since leaving her home, she felt a thread of strength weaving through her fear. And soon, that strength would be tested in ways she never imagined. The longer the plane sat on the tarmac, the more restless the passengers grew. Murmurs rippled through the cabin, a mix of impatience and curiosity, and Olivia, sensing the perfect opportunity, leaned into the whispers like a snake slithering through tall grass. She turned in her seat, her voice pitched just loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "It's tragic, really. Poor Sarah, she's been unstable for years. Mark tried so hard to keep her together, but, well, you can see how she is." A woman 2 rows ahead frowned. "Unstable?" Olivia sighed dramatically, placing a hand over her chest as though burdened by sorrow. "Yes, she harms herself. I've seen it. Mark has told me so many times. She makes bruises and then blames him. Can you imagine what it's like for him? To live with someone who destroys her own body just for attention?" Gasps and low mutters followed. Passengers glanced at Sarah, their expressions shifting from sympathy to suspicion. Sarah felt the weight of their stares pressing against her skin. Shame crawled up her throat. She wanted to scream the truth, to rip Olivia's lies apart, but her voice wouldn't come. James noticed immediately. His fists clenched against the armrest, but he didn't move. Not yet. He knew striking too soon would only make the gossip spread further. He watched Olivia carefully, every word sharpening his resolve. Olivia continued, her tone sweet but cutting. "Mark has been a saint, really. He works hard, provides for her, and this is how she repays him. I told him once that he deserved better, but he just shook his head. He loves her, despite everything." Her words dripped with poison, weaving a false picture of devotion that made Sarah's stomach twist. Tears stung her eyes. She could feel the narrative slipping from her hands, stolen and twisted, before strangers who knew nothing of her suffering. One passenger, a middle-aged man across the aisle, muttered, "If that's true, she shouldn't be flying alone in her condition." Another nodded, whispering something Sarah couldn't catch, but she saw the doubt in their faces. Sarah's chest tightened. Panic clawed at her lungs. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering silently to her child, "Hold on. Just hold on." James leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Don't listen to them. She's trying to break you, but she won't succeed. Not while I'm here." Sarah turned her face toward him, tears glistening. For a moment she believed him, yet Olivia's words still echoed around the cabin, seeping into ears, planting seeds of distrust that might be hard to erase. Olivia leaned back, satisfied, her smile smug. She thought she had won this round. But James's eyes burned with determination, and Sarah's trembling heart began to steady. Because soon, Olivia would discover that lies are fragile things, and truth always finds its voice. Sarah tried to hold herself together, but the walls she had built inside her were crumbling. Olivia's lies lingered in the air like smoke, choking her, and the stares of strangers pierced deeper than any bruise. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths. She pressed both hands against her belly, silently praying the baby wouldn't feel her panic. James leaned closer, his presence steady, his voice calm but insistent. "Sarah, look at me. You don't have to hide anymore. Whatever happened, whatever you're running from, I need to know. Let me help you." Her lips trembled. For a moment she wanted to stay silent, to bury the truth again as she had done for years. But then she saw his eyes. They weren't pitying, they weren't judgmental. They were strong, unwavering, the kind of eyes that promised protection. Tears burst free. She shook her head, but the words spilled out, raw and broken. "He hurts me, James. He always hurts me." James froze, his jaw tightening. "Mark?" Sarah nodded, sobbing now. "Yes. At first it was just words. Cruel things, things that cut me down every day. But then it became fists, kicks, shoving me into walls. Every time I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. And when I got pregnant, I thought he would change. I thought the baby would soften him. But it only made him angrier." Her voice cracked, her hands clutching at her blanket as if it could shield her from the memories. "He said I ruined his life. He said I trapped him. And Olivia." She stood there, watching. Sometimes she laughed. She called me weak, pathetic. She told me no one would believe me if I spoke out. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. A few glanced at her, startled by the confession. Olivia's smug smile faltered, just slightly. James's hands curled into fists, his knuckles white. His voice came out low, controlled, but filled with fire. "He hit you while you're carrying his child?" Sarah nodded again, her tears dripping onto her lap. "This morning. He wouldn't stop. I begged him to think of the baby, but he just kept going. I thought he would kill me, James. So I ran. I packed a bag, I bought this ticket, and I left everything behind. It was the only way." James leaned closer, his hand resting gently over hers, grounding her trembling body. "You did the right thing," he said firmly. "You're safe now. I won't let him touch you again." Her sobs softened, replaced by trembling breaths. For the first time, Sarah felt the chains of silence break. The truth was out. She had spoken it aloud, and James had not turned away. And in that moment, she realized she had an ally far stronger than she'd ever imagined. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the engines and Sarah's soft, uneven breaths. Her confession hung in the air like shattered glass. Passengers shifted in their seats, some pretending not to hear, others unable to look away. Olivia crossed her arms, her face tight, but even she seemed rattled by the raw truth spilling from Sarah's lips. James leaned closer, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. His voice, low but steady, cut through the silence. "Sarah, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. I swear to you, he will never lay another hand on you." She shook her head weakly, disbelief flickering in her tear-stained eyes. "You don't understand, James. Mark doesn't stop. He finds me, no matter where I go. He has money, connections. I've tried to leave before. It never works." James's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face hardening with resolve. "Then this time will be different, because this time you have me." Sarah blinked, uncertain. "Why would you do this for me? After all these years?" James's expression softened. "Because I still remember the girl who sat next to me in the library, helping me study when I was failing. The girl who believed in me before I even believed in myself. You were my friend, Sarah. You mattered to me then, and you matter to me now." Her lips trembled, words caught in her throat. She had grown so used to cruelty that kindness felt almost unbearable. James continued, his tone stronger now. "I own this airline. I have influence, resources, people who will listen. If Mark thinks he can chase you onto this plane, he's mistaken. If Olivia thinks she can poison people with lies, she's about to find out what truth looks like. And if the law has failed you, then I'll make sure it doesn't this time. You have my word." Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of his vow sinking deep into her heart. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of safety, a fragile spark of trust. She gripped his hand, her own trembling. "Please, don't let him take my baby. That's all I want, to keep this child safe." James squeezed her hand gently, his gaze unwavering. "He won't. I promise you, Sarah. Not your baby. Not you. This ends now." Across the aisle, Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her smirk gone. She had expected Sarah to crumble, but instead she was witnessing something else. A woman slowly finding her strength, and a man standing fiercely by her side. Sarah exhaled shakily, leaning back in her seat. Fear still lived in her chest, but James's vow wrapped around her like armor. And soon, that vow would be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Back in New York, Mark Mitchell paced the marble floor of his penthouse apartment, fury burning in his chest. A half-empty glass of whiskey trembled in his hand as he read the message flashing across his phone screen. Passenger confirmed. Sarah Mitchell boarded Flight 237 to Chicago. His jaw clenched so hard it ached. She had dared to run. She had slipped past him, carrying his child, and now she was thousands of feet above the ground, thinking she could escape. The thought made his vision blur with rage. Across the sofa, Olivia's abandoned purse sat open, her lipstick tube rolling across the cushion. Mark had noticed her absence earlier but hadn't cared. She came and went as she pleased. But Sarah belonged to him. That was how he saw it. She was his property, his possession, and no possession escaped without punishment. He hurled the whiskey glass against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. His breathing came heavy, animal-like, as he snatched his phone and dialed a number. "Get me the airport," he barked. "I don't care what it takes. Stop that plane if you have to. She can't leave." The voice on the other end hesitated. "Sir, the flight has already departed from the gate. It may be airborne soon. Our influence doesn't extend that far." "Then make it extend," Mark roared, slamming his fist on the table. "Do you know who I am? Do you think I'll let some pregnant fool humiliate me like this? I'll drag her back myself if I have to." When he ended the call, his reflection in the dark window stared back. Wild eyes, clenched fists, a man losing control. But beneath the fury was calculation. He wasn't just angry, he was determined. If Sarah thought she could outsmart him, she was wrong. He had money, he had lawyers, he had people at the airport who still owed him favors. Mark's lips curled into a bitter smile. You think you can run, Sarah? You think some old friend will save you? No one saves you from me. He grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door, barking orders into his phone again. I want her tracked. Every move she makes, every person she speaks to, and find out who's sitting with her on that flight. If someone's helping her, I'll destroy them too. Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky, but inside, Mark's heart burned darker than ever. He wasn't going to let Sarah slip through his fingers. He would follow, corner, and break her all over again. And high above the clouds, Sarah had no idea that the monster she escaped was already plotting his next move. Olivia's composure cracked as the cabin shifted away from her. The ripple of whispers and skeptical looks made her stomach twist. She had expected people to side with her, not to rally around a battered woman. That would not do. She would take back the story, smooth the outrage, and make herself the victim instead. She adjusted her posture, sweeping a practiced smile across her face. Folks, she said, voice light and deliberately loud, I'm sorry if my earlier words upset anyone. I hate drama as much as the next person, but I think people deserve context. She kept her tone calm, the kind that suggested reason rather than accusation. James watched her carefully, then stood. He did not shout, he simply crossed the aisle and stood level with Olivia, a quiet but undeniable presence that drew attention. Let's not make this personal theater, he said. If they're allegations, they deserve facts, not gossip. Olivia met his gaze with a flash of annoyance. And who are you to decide that? She asked, lips curling. You're a stranger. You don't know these people. James's expression did not change. I'm not a stranger, and I'm not here to judge. I'm here to make sure everyone on this aircraft is safe and treated fairly. If someone needs help, we will provide it. If there are claims, we will investigate them properly. The flight attendants had drawn closer. Their training kicked in. Tension needed managing, not escalation. One of them cleared her throat and promised to notify the captain, who had already been informed of a delay and would be coordinating with ground staff when they landed. Passengers shifted uneasily. Olivia tried to pivot to plant doubt in the minds around her. There are always two sides, she said softly. You should be careful about rushing to conclusions. Her strategy was familiar. Seed uncertainty and watch the crowd divide. It worked on many occasions. People liked tidy narratives, but when the story grew messy, they often sought the path of least resistance. A man nearby raised his hand slightly. Do we know whether someone has filed a police report? He asked, genuinely curious. Olivia smiled, seeing an opening to regain control, but James's reply cut across her plan. We can make sure the right authorities are alerted, he said. This flight will not turn into a place for harassment or rumor. If anyone needs assistance after landing, I will personally ensure there are channels to handle it. Olivia's smile thinned. The captain's announcement about security checks and officials meeting them on the ground reinforced James's words. Crew members moved with purpose, not the indecisive chatter Olivia had hoped for. Her advantage evaporated as the cabin's mood shifted. People who moments earlier had exchanged glances of doubt now sat in awkward silence, waiting to see how officials would respond. Olivia sank back, unmoored. Sarah breathed more easily. The tension did not disappear, but the scramble for gossip lost momentum. James had taken. At Chicago O'Hare International, the arrival terminal buzzed with the chaos of evening flights. Families reunited, business travelers rushed for connections, children cried in strollers. But among the crowd, a storm was brewing. Mark Mitchell had arrived. He strode through the terminal with the same predatory energy Sarah knew too well. His tailored suit was rumpled from the rushed flight, but his fury was sharp, burning in his eyes. Two men followed close behind, associates he often used for business, that always felt more like intimidation. Mark checked the board, confirming Sarah's flight was delayed but due soon. His lips curled. She thinks she's clever, sneaking out, he muttered. She thinks she can humiliate me in front of the world. One of the men asked, You want us to wait at the gate? Mark shook his head. No, Too obvious. We'll be ready when she lands. I'll take her home myself. She won't get far." As he spoke, he pulled his phone and dialed Olivia. The line buzzed, then clicked. "Where is she?" he barked. Olivia's voice trembled, a hint of strain creeping in despite her attempt to sound calm. "She's on the plane. James Carter is here. He's protecting her." Mark froze, his jaw tightening. James Carter? The name was familiar, too familiar. He remembered hearing it back when Sarah was in college, the friend she always spoke of. A friend Mark had hated without even meeting. And now that same man was back, standing between him and his wife. "Listen to me," Mark growled into the phone. "Keep her calm. Make her look unstable. I'll handle Carter. He doesn't know who he's dealing with." He ended the call, his chest heaving. Around him, travelers hurried past, unaware that a man consumed by violence and control was plotting his next move. For Mark, this wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about pride. Power. No woman, especially not his wife, was going to embarrass him. Not in public, not in court, not ever. He checked his watch. Flight 237 would land in less than an hour. He turned to his men. "When she walks out, you flank her. I don't care who's with her. She's mine. And anyone who stands in the way." He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung heavy in the air. The men nodded. They knew what he meant. Mark adjusted his tie, straightened his shoulders, and let a cold smile stretch across his lips. "Sarah thinks she's free. She has no idea what's waiting for her." And as the plane cut through the night sky, Sarah unknowingly flew straight toward the man she feared most. The cabin had grown tense again, the air thick with unspoken conflict. Sarah sat stiffly in her seat, her eyes downcast, while Olivia shifted restlessly a few rows ahead. James kept his posture calm, but his presence alone made it clear he wasn't going to let anything slip past him. Unbeknownst to them, 2 rows behind Sarah, a young man quietly adjusted his phone. His name was Daniel Ruiz, a college student traveling back home after visiting family in Los Angeles. He had seen the whole scene unfold, the bruises Sarah tried to hide, Olivia's poisonous words, the way James stood between them like a shield. Something about it tugged at him. It felt wrong. Deeply wrong, and Daniel wasn't the type to ignore injustice. So when Olivia raised her voice earlier, Daniel had pressed record. The video captured her sneers, her mocking claims that Sarah was unstable, and Sarah's trembling confession to James. The phone stayed angled low, hidden behind the seat, but the camera saw everything. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the footage. Every detail was there. The bruise on Sarah's cheek, the tear streaks on her face, the way she clutched her belly as if protecting her unborn child from the cruelty around her. He swallowed hard. This wasn't gossip. This was evidence. He leaned toward the woman seated beside him, an older traveler with kind eyes. "Ma'am," he whispered, "do you hear what's happening?" She nodded solemnly. "I've heard enough. That poor girl, she doesn't deserve this." Daniel showed her the phone briefly. Her eyes widened. "You caught it all?" He nodded. "I think she'll need this. If her husband's as dangerous as they say, proof might be the only thing that saves her." The woman touched his arm gently. "Hold on to it. Don't let anyone see. When we land, you give that video to the right person." Daniel tucked the phone close to his chest, his heart racing. He hadn't planned to get involved, but something inside him said he had no choice. Sarah's fight wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who refused to stay silent. Up front, Olivia's voice rose again, trying to regain control. She glanced back at Sarah, then at the passengers, attempting to reel them into her narrative once more. But Daniel noticed a shift. The people around him weren't buying it anymore. They had seen too much, heard too much. Doubt was turning against Olivia. James leaned close to Sarah, whispering something she alone could hear. Her expression softened, just barely, a fragile spark of hope flickering through her fear. And in the back, Daniel clutched his phone like a lifeline. Because soon, that recording would become the weapon that could shatter Mark's lies and expose Olivia's cruelty to the world. The delay dragged on, but James Carter didn't waste a second. He had stayed quiet long enough, watching Olivia spin her web and Sarah drown under the weight of shame. Now it was time to act. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood tall in the narrow aisle, and drew the attention of everyone around him without raising his voice. His presence alone carried weight. Passengers looked up, sensing a shift in the air. "My name is James Carter," he began. calm but commanding. I don't usually share this on flights, but tonight requires clarity. I am the CEO of this airline, and as long as you are on my plane, safety and truth will not be compromised. A ripple moved through the cabin. Whispers spread. The owner? Here? Even the flight attendants straightened, exchanging glances. Olivia's smirk faltered. James continued, his gaze sweeping the cabin but settling on Sarah. What I've witnessed here tonight is more than a disagreement. It's an attempt to humiliate and silence a woman already carrying scars. Scars no one should bear. Sarah's breath caught. For so long she had endured in silence. Hearing someone speak the truth aloud, in front of strangers, sent shivers racing down her spine. Olivia shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. She's unstable, James. You're making a mistake defending her. You don't know the full story. James turned to her, his expression steady, almost cold. I know enough. I know when someone is being attacked, and I know when lies are being used to cover cruelty. Olivia opened her mouth again, but passengers murmured now, not in her favor. The tide was turning. James raised his hand, quieting the cabin. This plane will land soon, and when it does, officials will be waiting. If there are accusations, they'll be handled properly. But I will not allow harassment or false stories to spread unchecked. He paused, his voice tightening with steel. Not on my aircraft. The authority in his tone left no room for argument. The flight attendants nodded, reassured. The passengers sat straighter, some even clapping softly before stopping, unsure if applause was appropriate. Sarah stared at James, her heart pounding. She remembered the boy from college, full of dreams, and now saw the man he had become, powerful, unshakable, using his influence, not for pride, but for protection. Olivia sank back into her seat, her face pale with frustration. She had underestimated him. This was no ordinary ally standing beside Sarah. This was a man with the means and the will to dismantle everything Mark and Olivia had built on lies. James returned to his seat, his hand brushing Sarah's gently. You're safe, he whispered, low enough for only her to hear. And for the first time, Sarah believed it might be true. For several minutes after James spoke, the cabin remained hushed. The authority in his voice still echoed in the air, leaving Olivia cornered, her usual confidence rattled. She sat stiffly, her nails digging into her palms, her mind racing. She could not let Sarah win. Not here. Not ever. Then, like a mask snapping back into place, Olivia straightened her shoulders and forced a tremulous laugh. Oh, this is absurd, she said, loud enough for the nearest rows to hear. James, you've always had a soft spot for Sarah. Of course you'll defend her, but the rest of you need to understand, this isn't what it looks like. Passengers turned, curious, skeptical. Sarah shrank into her seat, her chest tight, but Olivia pressed on, sensing her chance to reclaim control. She's been lying to everyone, Olivia continued, her voice dripping with false pity. Mark has confided in me for months. Sarah, she has episodes. She lashes out, hurts herself, then blames him. That's why she looks the way she does. Gasps rippled through the cabin. A young woman across the aisle frowned, whispering to her partner. Olivia noticed and leaned into her performance. Please, don't misunderstand me. I wish it weren't true. But Mark is terrified of her. He loves her, but she's unstable, dangerous. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream that it was a lie, that she was the one terrified every night in her own home. But the words caught. Years of silence clamped around her mouth like iron. Olivia seized the pause. She stood slightly, hands raised as if in surrender. Look at her, she said, pointing toward Sarah. She can't even defend herself. Why? Because she knows the truth would unravel her story. Passengers shifted uneasily. Some looked sympathetic, others uncertain. Olivia smiled inwardly. Doubt. That was all she needed. Plant the seed, let it grow. James rose again, but Olivia cut him off quickly. Careful, James. You think defending her makes you noble, but you're blind. She's using you, just like she's used everyone. Ask yourself, why now? Why run away on this plane? Why you? Her words slithered into the air, twisting logic, feeding suspicion. She leaned back smugly, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut. Because she knows you'll protect her. Because she knows she can hide behind your name, your money. But when the truth comes out, she'll drag you down with her. The cabin buzzed again, uncertainty rippling like a wave. Olivia had turned the tables before. She could do it again. Sarah pressed her hands against her belly, tears stinging her eyes. James placed his hand firmly over hers, grounding her. His glare locked on Olivia, no longer calm, but burning with controlled rage. And in that moment, Olivia had no idea her lies were already being recorded, and soon the world would see them for what they were. The argument's echoes still hung heavy in the cabin when Sarah suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. A sharp pain shot through her body, so sudden and fierce that her breath hitched in her throat. Her face drained of color. James turned instantly, alarm flashing in his eyes. "Sarah? What is it?" Her lips quivered. "It's the baby. Something's wrong." Her voice cracked, nearly swallowed by the drone of the engines. Passengers who had been captivated by Olivia's accusations now shifted in alarm. The tension in the air changed, no longer charged with gossip, but with fear. A flight attendant rushed forward, kneeling beside Sarah's seat. "What's happening, ma'am?" the attendant asked gently. Sarah gripped her belly, tears streaming down her face. "Sharp pains. I don't know. Please, help." The attendant's voice rose, firm but calm. "We need a medical professional. Is there a doctor on board?" For a moment, silence stretched across the cabin. Then, a man a few rows back raised his hand. "I'm a physician," he said, already moving down the aisle. James shifted aside to give space, but he kept his hand on Sarah's shoulder, grounding her as her body shook. He whispered, "Stay with me. You're not alone." The doctor crouched, asking quick questions, checking her pulse, her breathing. "How far along are you?" 6 months, Sarah whispered. Her voice wavered with pain. The doctor nodded grimly. "She's under stress. We need to calm her down immediately. If this escalates, she could go into early labor." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Even Olivia's smug expression faltered. For once, her tongue was silent. James leaned close, speaking directly into Sarah's ear. "Breathe with me. In and out. Slow, steady." He guided her through the rhythm, his voice steady, refusing to let fear take her completely. Sarah clutched his hand like a lifeline. The baby shifted again inside her, a reminder of both her fragility and her strength. The doctor glanced at James. "She needs rest, calm, and water. Keep her away from stress." His eyes flicked briefly toward Olivia, the implication clear. The flight attendant sprang into action, bringing water, adjusting the air vents, dimming the lights near Sarah's seat. Slowly, her breathing began to steady, though the pain still lingered. James never let go of her hand. His gaze locked on Olivia, who sat frozen in her seat, finally stripped of her voice. For once, the passengers weren't listening to her lies. They were watching a woman fight to protect her unborn child. Sarah leaned against James, whispering through tears, "I thought I'd lose everything." James pressed her hand gently. "You won't. Not while I'm here." And in that fragile, terrifying moment, the cabin no longer doubted who the real victim was. The doctor finally stepped back, assuring the flight attendants that Sarah was stable for now. The crisis had passed, but her body still trembled with exhaustion. James sat close, his hand never leaving hers. He could feel how fragile she was, yet in her eyes he saw something stirring, a need to let the truth finally spill out. Her lips parted, voice hushed but heavy with years of pain. "James, there's something I need to tell you, something I've never said out loud." He leaned in, his gaze steady. "You can tell me anything." Sarah swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. "Mark wasn't just cruel, he wasn't just angry. He betrayed me in the worst way possible. While I carried his child, he carried on with her." Her gaze flickered toward Olivia, whose face stiffened. "With her." Gasps spread through the nearby rows. Even those who had doubted before now looked at Olivia with disgust. Sarah's voice cracked as she continued. "I knew about the affair. I heard them on the phone, laughing about me, about how pathetic I was, and every time I confronted him, the beatings got worse. He said no one would believe me, that Olivia was the only one who understood him." Olivia shifted uncomfortably, her mask of confidence slipping. "That's a lie," she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. Sarah pressed her hand against her belly, her tears falling freely now. "I stayed, James. I stayed because I thought love could fix it, because I was afraid of being alone, because I thought the baby needed a father. But every bruise, every night I cried myself to sleep, I realized something. He never loved me. He only loved control. And she gestured toward Olivia, her voice trembling with fury. She helped him break me." The cabin fell silent. Passengers stared, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others murmuring softly to one another. Sarah's raw honesty pierced deeper than any of Olivia's manipulations. James's chest tightened. Hearing her pain spoken so clearly ignited something fierce within him. He reached for her hand again, his voice steady but filled with fire. You don't have to carry this anymore. They don't get to own your story. Not him, not her. You're stronger than both of them combined. Sarah met his gaze, her tears glistening. For the first time in years, she felt her truth acknowledged. Not dismissed. Behind them, Daniel Ruiz discreetly adjusted his phone again, capturing every word. Proof, evidence. The kind of testimony that could destroy Mark and Olivia's carefully built lies. Sarah leaned her head against James's shoulder, whispering brokenly, I just want this nightmare to end. James tightened his arm protectively around her. It will. I swear to you, Sarah, it ends tonight. And Olivia knew, with a sickening twist in her gut, that the tide had finally turned against her. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight prepared for descent. Outside the window, the city of Chicago glimmered like a sea of stars, but inside, Sarah felt the weight of her past pressing down. She had just laid bare the darkest truths of her marriage, truths she had hidden even from herself. For years, she had been defined by fear. Tonight, something was shifting. She straightened in her seat, brushing tears from her cheeks. Her reflection in the window still showed bruises, swollen eyes, a tired body. But behind those marks she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Resolve. James noticed the change immediately. What are you thinking? He asked softly. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice steadier than before. I'm tired of being afraid. For so long I believed Mark's lies, that I was weak, worthless, powerless. But he was wrong. He wanted me to feel small so he could feel big. Tonight, I won't let him define me anymore. Passengers nearby turned their heads, listening. They had watched her crumble under Olivia's venom and cry through confessions of betrayal. Now they watched her rise, not physically but emotionally, reclaiming her own voice. Olivia scoffed, attempting to regain control. Don't fool yourself, Sarah. Words don't change who you are. You're still the broken little wife who couldn't keep her husband. Sarah's eyes snapped toward her, and for once there was no fear. No, Olivia, she said firmly, her voice cutting through the cabin. I'm the woman he couldn't break, and you. Her gaze locked on Olivia with sharp clarity. You're nothing more than his accomplice. A ripple of approval moved through the passengers. Someone muttered, good for her. Another nodded, eyes shining with support. Olivia's face flushed, her arrogance crumbling under the weight of Sarah's newfound strength. James's chest swelled with quiet pride. This was the Sarah he remembered. The woman who once spoke with conviction, who believed in herself and others. She had been buried under years of abuse, but she was resurfacing now, stronger than ever. Sarah turned back to James, her voice trembling not with fear, but determination. When we land, I won't run anymore. I'll face him. I'll face them both, and I'll fight. Not just for me, but for my baby. My child deserves a mother who isn't afraid. James reached for her hand, squeezing gently. You're not alone in this fight. I'll be right beside you. Sarah nodded, her tears drying. For the first time she believed it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to take back her life. And as the plane descended through the night sky, Sarah Mitchell was no longer just a victim. She was becoming a force that neither Mark nor Olivia could silence. The wheels touched down with a jolt, the cabin filling with the rumble of descent. Passengers exhaled in relief, but Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew what waited at the terminal. Mark's rage, Olivia's schemes, the battle she had avoided for years. Yet this time, something was different. She wasn't alone. As the plane slowed along the runway, the lead flight attendant made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Upon arrival, security and law enforcement will be boarding the aircraft. Thank you for your cooperation. A buzz rippled through the passengers. Olivia stiffened, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the armrest. Sarah glanced at James, who gave a firm nod. The moment of reckoning was near. Then, Daniel Ruiz, the young passenger who had been quietly filming, rose halfway from his seat. Excuse me, he said, voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. I recorded what happened on this flight, the things Olivia said, the way Sarah was treated. I think the authorities should see it. Gasps echoed. Olivia whipped around, her face flushing with panic. You can't do that. That's illegal, invading privacy. But the older woman seated beside Daniel stood as well. No, it's not illegal when it's evidence of abuse. We all saw what happened. That video tells the truth. Others began nodding. A man in a business suit spoke up. I heard everything. Sarah wasn't the one causing trouble. She was the one being attacked. A mother traveling with her teenage daughter added, and I saw the bruises. Don't tell me she did that to herself. No woman does that for fun. The tide that Olivia had tried so hard to control now turned completely against her. Passengers who had once been silent witnesses now became Sarah's allies, their voices rising together. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not from fear this time, but from relief. For years, she had lived believing no one would believe her. Now, strangers were standing up on her behalf. James placed a steady hand on Daniel's shoulder. Good work. Hold on to that video. When security boards, you hand it directly to them. Don't let it out of your sight. Daniel nodded firmly, his nervousness replaced with determination. She deserves justice. Olivia slumped in her seat, trapped. For the first time, her lies had nowhere to go. The web she had spun was unraveling thread by thread, and the truth was shining through. Sarah straightened in her seat, her voice steady. For years, they told me no one would believe me. Tonight, I finally know they were wrong. James squeezed her hand, pride gleaming in his eyes. And as the cabin doors prepared to open, Sarah was no longer just a victim. She was the woman whose truth was about to set her free. The cabin doors opened with a hiss, and the tension inside the aircraft spilled into the terminal. Uniformed officers waited at the gate, their presence commanding silence. Sarah's heart pounded as she clutched James's hand, knowing what waited just beyond the threshold. And then she saw him. Mark Mitchell stood tall in the terminal, his suit wrinkled from the hurried trip, his jaw tight with fury. Two men loomed behind him, shadows of intimidation. His eyes locked on Sarah, and for a moment the crowd seemed to fade, leaving only predator and prey. "Sarah," he growled, his voice carrying across the space. "You think you can run from me?" Her knees trembled, but she didn't look away this time. James stepped in front of her, his presence solid, unyielding. "She's not yours to control anymore," Mark sneered. "And who the hell are you? Another fool she's manipulating?" James's voice was calm, steady, dangerous. "I'm the man who's going to make sure you answer for what you've done." Before Mark could retort, Daniel Ruiz stepped forward, holding up his phone. "I have everything recorded. Every word Olivia said, every lie, every confession. The police need to see this." The lead officer took the phone, reviewing the footage quickly. His jaw tightened. He nodded to his partner. "That's enough. Mitchell, you're coming with us." Mark's face twisted in disbelief. "What? No, she's lying. That video proves nothing." But more voices rose from the crowd of passengers filing out of the jet bridge. "I heard Olivia admit it. I saw the bruises." She was terrified of him. Witness after witness stepped forward, their testimonies stacking like bricks in a wall. Mark could no longer break through. Olivia tried to slink away, but the officers blocked her path. "You'll be coming with us too," one of them said coldly. Her face drained of color, her perfect mask finally shattering. Mark lunged forward, pointing a finger at Sarah. "You'll regret this. You think you can ruin me? You're nothing without me." Sarah's body shook, but she drew herself up, her voice clear and unwavering. "No, Mark, I was nothing with you. Now, I'm free." The officers moved in, snapping handcuffs around Mark's wrists as he cursed and fought. The sound of metal clinking echoed like justice itself. Passengers watched, some clapping, others simply relieved to see the nightmare contained. James wrapped an arm around Sarah, steadying her. Her tears flowed freely, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from release. And as Mark was dragged away in handcuffs, Sarah knew her life of terror had finally ended. The terminal quieted after the storm. The echo of handcuffs clinking, the muffled protests of Mark and Olivia, and the stern voices of law enforcement faded into the distance. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the crushing weight on her chest lift. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "We're safe now." James stood beside her, steady as a rock. His eyes softened when he looked at her, and his words were like a balm to her wounds. "It's over," he said quietly. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not the same tears that had stained her cheeks so many nights in silence. These were tears of release, of a soul unshackled from years of torment. She let them flow freely, her her shoulders shaking as the sobs came, and for the first time she didn't care who saw. Passengers who had borne witness to her ordeal lingered nearby. A woman touched her arm gently and whispered, "You're brave. Don't ever forget that." A man in a suit added, "You gave a voice to women who can't speak yet. What you did tonight, it mattered." Sarah could only nod, overwhelmed by the kindness of strangers. For so long she had believed no one would ever believe her. Yet here she was, surrounded not by doubt, but by validation. Strangers had stood up for her, and justice had begun its course. James guided her to a quiet bench near the wide terminal windows. Outside, the city lights glittered like stars, promising a dawn of new beginnings, even though night still cloaked the sky. He sat close beside her, his hand covering hers in a way that steadied her trembling heart. "This doesn't have to be the end of the road," he murmured. "It can be the beginning." Sarah looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You believed me when no one else did. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. I don't even know how to thank you." James shook his head gently, his eyes holding hers. "You don't need to thank me. You saved yourself the moment you chose to run. All I did was walk beside you the rest of the way." Her tears returned, but this time they were softer, accompanied by the faintest of smiles. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the strength of a woman rediscovering her voice. "For the first time in years, I feel free." Time passed, and with it came the slow but steady rebuilding of her life. Months later, in the courthouse, Sarah sat tall, her hand resting protectively over her belly as the judge read the verdict. Mark was sentenced for domestic abuse, stripped of the power he had once wielded so cruelly. His face twisted in anger, but it no longer had power over her. Olivia, disgraced, vanished from headlines and social circles, forgotten as quickly as she had risen. The gavel's final strike confirmed what Sarah already knew in her heart. Freedom was permanent. At first, rebuilding was fragile. She began counseling, unraveling the tangled knots of shame and fear that had bound her for so long. She leaned on the support of those who believed her, James, a few close confidants, and even strangers who had reached out after hearing her story. Each day was a step forward, sometimes small, sometimes halting, but always forward. She learned to laugh again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. She decorated a nursery with pastel colors, filling it not with shadows of fear, but with promises of warmth. She rediscovered her reflection in the mirror, not the bruised, broken woman she once saw, but a survivor who carried strength in her scars. James remained by her side through it all. He didn't rush her healing, he simply walked with her, steady, patient, constant. When nightmares clawed at her in the night, he was there with gentle words. When doubts crept into her mind, he reminded her of her courage. Slowly, his presence became not just comfort, but a foundation. And then came the day her child was born. Sarah cradled the tiny bundle in her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the miracle she had once feared she might never hold. The baby's small fingers curled around hers, fragile yet strong. She pressed a kiss to the soft forehead, whispering, "You'll never know the pain I knew. I promise." James stood beside her, smiling softly, his hand brushing against the baby's tiny hand. His voice was steady, filled with quiet conviction. "You're not alone anymore." He reminded her, the same words he had spoken on the plane, the words that had anchored her when she was sinking. Sarah leaned into him, her voice breaking with emotion as she whispered back, "I know, and I never will be again." The applause of strangers in the airport, the vow James had made, the justice served, all of it had led to this moment. A new life, not only for her child but for her as well. And as Sarah stepped into her future, she no longer carried the scars of her past as burdens. Instead, she carried them as proof of survival, of strength, of transformation. Mark's voice, once the soundtrack of her fear, was silenced. Olivia's venomous sneers were nothing but echoes. What remained was freedom, love, and the unshakable certainty that she had triumphed. Sarah Mitchell was no longer just a survivor of abuse. She was a mother, a woman who had found love again, and a warrior who had reclaimed her dignity. And as she looked down at her newborn child and then up at James, she knew that the story of her life was no longer written in pain. It was written in courage, freedom, and peace. And in that moment, Sarah didn't just step into her future, she embraced it fully. carrying with her the strength of a survivor who had finally found her home. All right, my friend, so the story has finally come to a close. You're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until this very moment, it means something in Sarah's journey has touched your heart in a way words can hardly explain. Maybe you saw yourself, maybe someone you know, or maybe it simply stirred that quiet reminder inside you that no matter how heavy the night feels, there is always the promise of dawn. The Stoic Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." Sarah's life is proof of that. She couldn't control Mark's fists or Olivia's cruelty, but she chose to control her own courage, to rise and to protect her child. And Seneca reminded us, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. Every tear Sarah shed was an act of survival. Every step she took away from fear was a victory. So here's what this story asks of us. Speak up, don't stay silent, and remember that your scars are not shame. They are proof that you've survived. Healing is possible, justice is possible, and love is possible. If you're still here with me, my wonderful friend, then let me ask you, did something in this story stir your soul? If it did, don't just keep it inside. Share this video with someone who needs courage. Hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep walking through these stories together. Because like Sarah, you too have the strength to rise. And you never have to rise alone.